We have a quorum of 4 members, including 1 deputy and 1 senator, and I wish therefore to call the meeting to order and advise members that we are in public session. And before we get into the business today, I want to welcome Isla and Patrick to the committee room here. They're on work experience with Deputy Whitmore as part of their transition year programme and have made the not too long journey from County Wicklow today. So to Fáilte Rómhaibh, and also to representatives of the National Inshore Fishermen's Association who have been before this committee already in the first part of this conversation. To Fáilte Rómhaibh anseo agus gur maith bheith ling Oireachtas. With that said, I want to note that we have apologies from Senators Manus Boyle and Dermot Wilson, and I also want to read you a note on privilege. Witnesses who are giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence they give to this committee. This means that a witness has a full defence in any defamation action for anything said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard, and are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made against an identifiable third person or entity. Privilege against defamation does not apply to the publication by you outside of the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from proceedings. And to members, I would remind you of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of Leinster House complex in order to participate in public meetings. That members may join us on Microsoft Teams, but I will not permit a member to participate where they are not adhering to the constitutional requirement of being here on the campus. Therefore, a member who attempts to participate from outside the precincts will be asked to leave the meeting, and any member who is participating via Microsoft Teams, I will ask that prior to making their contribution that you verbally confirm to me that you are on the grounds of Leinster House. And members are once again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way to make him, her or it identifiable, or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you would comply with any such direction I make. The agenda for today's meeting is inshore and island fisheries, and as I mentioned, it comes on the back of previous engagements we've had with sectoral representatives, and the committee will hear from the Minister of State of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine and Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment, Mr Timmy Dooley, TD, and the Minister is joined by the following officials from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Ms Suzanne Brennan and Ms Carol Forrest, and you're both very welcome. And I remind members that while the Minister of State may call on those officials to speak briefly for clarification purposes during the meeting, where a specific or technical point arises, the Minister of State is the witness before this committee, whereas the officials are not. The officials can clarify issues for the committee, but any follow-up questions from members should be put to the Minister of State directly, as he is the accountable person before the committee. And the opening statement from the Minister has been circulated, so I'll give the Minister 5 minutes to read the opening statement, or alternatively to provide a shorter summary, and then we'll move into questions and answers. And I just say to members at this point that we will be taking 7 minutes. The timers are displayed around the room, and to include time for questions and the Minister's responses in that 7-minute time frame, and we will go for a second round once we've concluded. So with that said, Minister, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the invitation. Thanks for providing us with an opportunity to set out our approach in relation to this particular issue of inshore and small-scale fishermen and women. At the outset too, I want to recognise the presence of Isla and Patrick, and thank you for showing an interest in this area. You certainly couldn't have a better person guiding you through these areas than Deputy Whitmore, with her understanding of that area, and to our friends from the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, Michael Desmond and John Minari, who are and provide ongoing advice, support on occasion, and criticism when it's necessary of my role as Minister, and I thank them for that. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. In the programme for government, this government has pledged to maintain the support for the inshore fishing sector and to promote sustainability in fish stocks. The inshore sector is well represented by the National Inshore Fisheries Forum, NIF, and its regional fora, and the 2 producer organisations, the National Inshore Fishermen's Association that I've already mentioned, and also the Irish Island Marine Resource Organisation. And both producer organisations, along with NIF, sit on the Quota Management Advisory Committee influencing management of Ireland's fish quotas within national policy. And I want to acknowledge their contribution made by both organisations in their recent appearances before the Joint Committee. Engagement with representatives of Ireland's inshore fishing sector is a key priority for me. I met again with NIFA this morning, where we discussed key issues for the sector, and I'm aware of the challenges faced by the inshore sector, and I'm committed to working through these issues with the sector to identify the best way to secure a sustainable future for the fleet. And I will always work to ensure the fishing sector's interests are fully represented at domestic, at European and international level. And to that extent, when I previously met with members of the inshore POs, they were concerned about the funding mechanism that's in place that really, I suppose, is a disincentive for them or makes it difficult for them to survive. So in 2025, the Department met with all POs and BIM to review and revise the MFAF producer organisation scheme. And on foot of this, the scheme was revised with provision made for higher grant aid rates and thresholds. And previously I met with NIFA and IMRO to discuss their request that prepayments to newly formed POs be facilitated. I instructed officials in my department to seek the sanction of the Department of Public Expenditure, Infrastructure, Public Service Reform and Digitisation to allow for prepayments to be made under the producer organisation scheme, recognising the small scale of those organisations and they not having the financial wherewithal to spend first and claim later. So I'm pleased to inform the committee that deeper sanction has been forthcoming and the terms of the PO funding scheme will be amended accordingly. I just got information about that late yesterday evening. And under the terms of the proposed revision, when submitting their production and marketing plans, POs will be able to seek a prepayment of 50% of the project finance set out in the PMP. This will be paid once the PMP has been approved for funding. The balance of funding for eligible costs can then be drawn down by the PO in the normal way at the end of the year. Supporting documentation will not be required in relation to the eligible costs covered by this prepayment until the PO submit its final claim for funding. And this is still subject to the grant aid rates that apply under the scheme, and I'm hopeful that will provide the kind of support that the smaller scale POs representing the inshore fishing sector so readily needed. I understand the inshore sector is seeking additional funding supports too, and would like to stress that significant improvements have been made in recent years and that the upcoming BIM report on the findings of inshore census and the inshore fleet economic adjustment scheme will inform development of future funding supports for the inshore fleet. I would also like to see the inshore sector leverage their position as producers of local sustainably fished seafood by selling directly in their locality to maximise the value of their catch. It's a challenge, it's not easy, but it's something I think will help to move what they're producing sustainably beyond just being a commodity that's sold to processors and they're not getting or obtaining the kind of reward that they should. And at the end of September, I signed the relevant legal instrument to restrict trawling activity by large vessels inside the 6 nautical miles from the 1st of October next year. And I'm confident that this will further help to re-establish the important links between local fish resources, local fleets and local economies. I have also now closed sprat fishing for vessels over 18 metres in inshore waters. I, of course, would welcome the engagement with the inshore sector and will answer any questions that the committee might have today. Thank you very much, Chair.
Margaret Ara, and the first on my list here is Deputy Whitmore. So Seachno Mead.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that submission. I just have a few questions. Firstly, I want to welcome the changes to the PO funding. That was actually one of the issues I was going to raise because myself and other committee members would be well aware of the difficulties in the upfront payments for those small POs, so that is very welcome. One other matter that I was just hoping to get some feedback on is the special recognition of island fisheries. Obviously, the Heritage Licence Bill was, has been in the system for many years now and has been supported by parties on inside and outside of government, but it really hasn't gone anywhere. And I believe that at one stage that the previous minister stated that it wouldn't be possible because it wouldn't be in compliance with EU rules. But I'm just wondering, Minister, whether you would take a look at that again, because obviously Article 17 of the fisheries policy does allow for special recognition to be provided, and is that something that you have or will consider examining? Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your first point, which I think is accepted by all. And I should have said, in addition to those from the fishing sector, it has been raised with me by members of this committee, so it was a joint approach. Just in relation to the heritage licence, in 2022 the Minister for Agriculture wrote to the Attorney General to seek a comprehensive advice on the Island Fisheries Heritage Licence Bill and its position with regards to existing national and EU sea fisheries legislation. And the Attorney General returned at that stage a comprehensive view that the bill was not compatible with EU regulations supporting the common fisheries policy and the national implementing legislation which gave effect to those provisions. So it's important to us, I suppose, to recognise that the lack of any such legislation has not prevented us from continuing to implement supports for inshore fishermen and women and our rural coastal communities, including on our islands. However, I'm happy to have a look at it again to try to understand if there's another way to achieve the same thing. It may have been, and just to recognise the change of chair there for a moment, who will have lots of experience in this regard, it may be that the bill that was provided at the time was non-compatible. Maybe some amendments to that, or maybe some other elements of it. What I'm not aware of is if there was a piece of work done in trying to understand how the bill might be changed or amended to fit within that. That's where I'm not clear on. So I think maybe if we go back and look at the spirit of what was trying to be achieved rather than the hardwired legislation, perhaps there's something there. It's something that I'm prepared to look at, but I'm also conscious of the effort in our department and the myriad of work that I'm thrown to officials. I don't want to give a time frame, but it's something that I'm prepared to look at. But I'm advised at the moment that we're still providing supports to these communities and to these fishermen and women without that legislation being in place. But happy to look at it, and if there's a proposal that you might have that we can work on, I'd certainly be prepared to look at it.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think maybe it is how it was framed, perhaps maybe putting in the context of Article 17, or indeed UNESCO, I believe, have a special recognition. I just throw that out by way of potential. I not having gone through it in detail or not having had a legal analysis of that, I don't want to rubbish the production of the bill, because it dates back some time. But would it be possible for you to request that legal analysis then, or to see whether or not what the specific issues were? Happy
to get that. And, let me see if I can provide it. It's always difficult to provide Attorney General's advice, but I may be able to provide you with something that will give you some sense of the issues that arose in that instance.
Great, thank you. And indeed, both Isla and Patrick yesterday were working in my office, and they went through your opening statements, and we had a look at the previous documentation from the committees. And one of the issues that they identified was a lack of funding for infrastructure, particularly on the islands and in remote fishing communities. Can you just outline what funding opportunities there are, and have you spoken to any other ministers or departments about maybe rationalising or directing funding that would not only benefit rural communities but the fishing sector within those communities as well?
Yes, so there's a number of funding mechanisms that already exist, and it's based on ownership. So the department, or the state own, through the Department of Agriculture, I suppose better put, has responsibility for 6 large-scale fishing harbours, and the state funds those on an annual basis with upgrade and maintenance. And I think last year that was to the tune of about 20, we'll get the figures exactly for you in terms of the number of millions that went in last year, and there has been over successive years. But I know then that there are many piers and harbours that provide a very significant amount of infrastructure access for the small-scale fisheries. So 27.7 million last year was the gross, and I think there was probably 4.3% of that. 23.4% for the 6 fisheries harbours, including 385,000 for Cape Clear, and some specific piers, lights and beacons that fall under the responsibility of the department, even though we don't own them. 4.3 million went into the fund for dispersal through local authorities who have ownership now of piers and harbours. Gets a lot of good work done, and I hear from the small-scale inland fishermen and women for relatively small amount of money. Next year, having full clarity on how much will be available there, but I'd like to maintain the same level. I have had an initial conversation with Minister Dara Calleary to try to understand what we can do together in terms of commingling of capital funds. There's nothing structured yet. Where we fall down a little bit at times is because it's not a fishing harbour, or a lot of the activity may not be fishing, it doesn't fit under the criteria that we might have. But you can have a jetty or a pier that's being used for tourism activity, for leisure activity, for sea angling, which is principally tourism, and then for somebody bringing in lobster pots or crab pots. From our perspective, it maybe is a small component of it. So I think we need, from a government perspective, to look how in a more substantial way we can do that. So as a new initiative this year, the Department circulated information to Inshore fisher representatives regarding the announcement of the 2025 programme. Now, the Inshore representatives were encouraged to highlight the smaller piers, slipways and such that they may require upgrading to the relevant local authorities. So that goes back to the 4.3 that I mentioned to you. I think the chairman is signalling that I need to move on. So happy to engage with you on that.
Tom Catcha and Ced Conchurella and Chuck the Parry McLaughlin.
Margaret Hirla. So, Minister, I acknowledge that you have been meeting with the inshore fishermen and islands fishermen, and as you know, they both separately presented to this committee to outline their concerns. And I just want to deal with a few at the outset. I think we might get a chance later on to come back to. So the first thing is around financial supports. And, you know, those of us who live in coastal communities, fishermen would have always, particularly inshore fishermen, would have pushed back on that. And what they would have said is, we need fish. You know, we want to fish. But the reality is that due to a whole range of factors, the curtailment of, you know, we started with salmon, with pollock. I don't need to talk about bluefin tuna, you know, as an outrage. One of the most lucrative fish in the world, in our waters, not available, not even for inshore fishermen. If you look at fuel costs, you look at the cost of bait, insurance costs, everywhere you turn. So I note in your opening statement there, Minister, you say that there's an upcoming BIM report, Inshore Census, Inshore Fleet Economic Adjustment Scheme. Well, you're meeting with the inshore fishermen, you're meeting with island fishermen. You know that they need some actual tangible financial subsidy scheme. Farmers have had it for a long, long time. And the reason why they've had it is that we need to keep them on the land. It's important, vital for rural communities, and to have food that is safe, secure and affordable. So the same has to be for fishermen. And in the presentation from NIFA, they talked about, you know, there's now schemes in place for, and rightly so, for musicians, for artistic people, for the arts. That's sound, that's right. But where is there going to be supports? And what I want in your response is not another BIM assessment. I want to know tangibly what you're going to do to provide financial supports to inshore and islands fishermen.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And I note your interest in this particular area, and you've outlined it on many occasions in the past. So when I took this post on, I looked at decisions and requests that were already in place, and in addition to that, I took some external expertise in to carry out a review across the fishing sector, and we appointed Kieran Mulvey, who's working through a significant body of work to report back to me and the department as to how best we might tackle the issues that have bedevilled previous ministers from a regulatory perspective. I await that report, and when I get it, I will use it to set out the terms and the conditions of a strategy document for the next 5 years, which is provided for in the programme for government. That, to me, has to be a comprehensive approach. And there's other issues that have been raised with me in relation to taxation measures, social supports, etc., some which fall outside the remit of this department. But I'm not going to give that by way of an excuse, because I feel that our department has a responsibility to the overall architecture of both the large-scale fishing effort, but particularly the smaller ones. And you've eloquently identified the comparisons between fishermen and small farmers. But just by way of information, you may, or I'm sure you're aware of it, but the comparisons are made to the income support, say, for farmers. Coming from a small farmer, I know how that works reasonably well. But these are provided within the framework of the Common Agricultural Policy, and specifically on the basis of a regulation of 2021-2115, which sets out the rules for support under the CAP strategic plans and makes provision for basic income supports. Unfortunately, there's no such provision in the Common Fisheries Policy, so that puts us on the back foot, because you then have the state aid rules and all that fly under it. So what I have to do when we get the report from Kieran Mulvey is to try to interrogate that again, to see what mechanism we can put in place, because I know the pressure they're under. I see their cost of living issues, the reduced stock of fish, and you thankfully pointed it out at the outset. These men and women aren't looking for handouts. They want fish. Unfortunately, with the kind of conservation measures that we have to put in place to try to regrow the stocks or improve the biomass, we have to put in place limits, and we're doing that. I would also say that I feel the approach we have taken on the sprat fishing in particular was a mechanism by previous ministers, but expedited by us again, to provide fish for that sector, to try to balance between the big and the small guys. So I'm hopeful that that can provide some help. But the primary source of funding for the Irish commercial seafood sector is the European Maritime and Fisheries Aquaculture Fund, which we refer to it as MFAF, and one of a number of European cohesion funds. The regulation is aligned with the objectives of the Common Fisheries Policy, and therefore the MFAF regulation does not make provision for the provision of income supports to primary producers in the seafood sector. So everywhere that I have looked at to try to say, how could I fund if we were minded to do it, I'm coming up against a stone wall. So, there is potential, and I'm hopeful, but as I said to the lads this morning, it's not going to happen tomorrow, a review of the Common Fisheries Policy. And we spoke again at the recent council meeting in Brussels with the Commissioner. And I think there's a recognition now, because the significant changes that have happened in fisheries generally over the last number of years, why you would need a significant review of the Common Fisheries Policy. It's a challenge too when you start reviewing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again in the context of it.
Sorry, I've only got 40 seconds left.
Please.
I might come back later on well, the final question is, I'll come back later, is you have a number of committees that deal with herring, mackerel allocations, and there's a real annoyance in the inshore sector that, well, as you know, the allocation that they're given from the quota is very low. And it's been referred to before by department advice. But anyway, to cut to the chase, how are you going to deal with that issue? How are you going to ensure a fair representation of inshore and islands on those committees, and a reasonable allocation for the inshore island sectors of those? They belong to the Irish people, public quota.
Very, very much so, and that's important for me, the maintenance of it being a state asset. The allocation, say, of mackerel, which is the most valuable stock at the minute, regardless of what the allowable catch is and regardless of what the quota that Ireland gets, the inshore sector, the hook and line sector, will retain 400 tonnes of mackerel for next year, unless we get below 400 tonnes. Now, that's not envisaged, even with the 70% cut, even with the Brexit cut, even with the scientific advice of 20%, 26%. Of quota, 20% last year, 26% in Brexit, and the 70% this year. That 400 tonnes is protected. Now, look, I'll let you into my thinking on this. If the scientific advice hadn't changed for this year, a cut of 70%, we were looking at the potential for some quota to be assigned in terms of a deal with Iceland. And I was of the view, and I discussed it with the industry, I was of the view that if we were going to increase quota, I would have been minded to move that 400 tonnes up. Don't know what that number would be, but I certainly was of a mind to increase that allocation if we were getting in additional mackerel from Iceland. there's no way I can do that with a cut of 70% on this occasion. But the 400 tonnes does not take a pro rata 70% cut, so that's protected. Now that's cold comfort to people who have been struggling.
But herring, what about the herring end of it?
I'll have to come back to you on the herring because there's some dispute with that grouping at the minute, and I know some people have pulled away from that management committee. But I will come back to you when we have time again on a fuller answer on that.
David Maxwell.
Yeah, Minister.
7 minutes in total.
That's okay. Just to go off track, Minister, something that I think when the next time you're in is the SFPA were in here last week, and to say I was not amused with their tone or the answers they give would be to say lightly, and I'm sure other members, I think we're looking to get you in after Christmas to discuss. A lot of what they had to say was decisions our predecessors made went against us and they wouldn't answer any questions because they were barred from doing so. So it's something I will be bringing up with you in the new year. Just to go back to what Deputy McLaughlin said, I suppose the Inshore, that 400 tonne, I thought they were looking for a bigger, a fairer share of that 400 tonne. I think maybe what you answered there, they had 400 tonne. I'm not sure. Can maybe you clarify, you know, have they 400 tonne? I thought they were looking at better share of the 400 tonne. They're looking more than 400 tonne. Okay, so is that something you're looking at in the pelagic species?
Well, just to be clear, I was looking at it. If the overall allowable quota was to increase, we were at a stage looking at an arrangement with Iceland that for certain trade-offs we might have increased our quota on mackerel. My view was that if there was mackerel coming in on the top, that I would look at sharing it between the larger vessels and the inshore. That didn't materialise, and our existing quota was cut by 70%. So it's not feasible or possible for me to take another slice and put it on top of the 400.
Okay.
But it would be my mind to do that if conditions change and if the biomass of mackerel were to change. But I don't want to give false comfort there.
Okay.
That's 3-4 years out, and somebody else may be sitting here. But
okay.
It may well be you, Deputy Maxwell, that have to make that decision.
Okay. I suppose, and what another thing we're looking and I see is they were to be looking the Inshore into future policy directions. You know that they would be. Is it something that now you're in that you're maybe looking into that they would be included in future policy directions and decisions?
Yeah, very much so, which is why that I was anxious at a very early stage to engage with all aspects of the sector to look at the policy platform that was there, or the policy issues as to what was working and, more importantly, from my perspective, what wasn't. And that was the idea behind engaging Kieran Mulvey to go out and engage. And I'm hopeful that the work that's being done with collecting that information, those thoughts and views, which I believe is going down very well. People find Kieran Mulvey to be a very sincere, sympathetic and an understanding person who has a good breadth of knowledge across that area, that will feed into the development of our policy platform over the next 4 to 5 years. Just to go back to the SFPA issue that you identified, as you know, it's independent of me, and particularly in the exercise of its functions. Yes, we have overall policy remit for it, and it's clearly set out in the legislation. Yes, we appoint the authority, but when it comes to their functioning, which I know was subject to the questioning here the last day from what I read in the media, but I do understand that the committee was interested in having a discussion with the SFP in relation to a particular case. However, the legislation is also very clear that no committee of the Oireachtas can require the authority to discuss details of individual cases. But look, I'm around this house a while and I've sat on the other side, and and Deputy McLaughlin knows that there are ways of, without getting into the specifics of a case, which is important, where you can find ways to discuss the generality of the case. And I would be hopeful, and there's really good people in the SFPA, would be hopeful, and not for me to direct, but I would be hopeful that they would engage with you in a general way so that they set out the issues that they have to deal with and their legislative basis for that, and to be as open and frank as they can be, whilst remaining within the provisions of the legislation and also maintaining their independent profile, function and authority.
Okay. My last question, maybe it's something, or maybe I'm going out and I think bluefin tuna. We have no quota in Ireland, and I'm hearing this all the time. All we do is the scientific work, tagging, and then there's some sports fishing boats you can go out. But what I'm told is that the bluefin tuna will come into within 1 kilometre to 20 kilometres of our coast. You would think if we could get a quota for inshore fishermen, what I'm told is, and it's done in a sustainable way, but what I'm told is that once the bluefin tuna go out past our waters, the international vessels are there hoovering up everything that they can get. We have no oversight of it. We don't know what they're catching. So is it something that we could look at, Minister? It is a highly valuable fish that for our inshore fishermen, if it was done in this, I'm not wholesale, I'm talking about in a sustainable manner, that some of our info that could be licensed to catch some, to add to what they're already catching. Is it something we're looking at, or maybe it's off the wall what I'm thinking about? But when you think that bluefin tuna are in our waters, we're doing everything, and then we go outside the waters, and these international vessels are just hoovering up, sailing off into the sunset with them. It is a wee bit galling for, I suppose, our inshore fishermen to see that catching, such a prize catch, heading away.
No, Deputy, you're certainly not off the wall. You'd be the first cabin man I ever met that was off the wall at a committee, but no, you're not, and it's something that's certainly been discussed. It's something that I have raised consistently at European Council, and there was agreements, I think, over the weekend in Seville in relation to the total allowable catch and the EU's share. I think we've taken a small percentage hit at European level on a greater catch. I think it was maybe only a reduction of about 0.1% in percentage terms, but the tonnage has gone up. We were aware that that was going to happen from a scientific perspective, and also because we've had that catch and release scientific-based fishery for authorised recreational angling vessels since 2019, and it was really around supporting the collection of data. That has been very useful for us in making the case, because we see a significant amount of bluefin tuna in our waters. Some of it is relating, I suppose, it's worth making the point in this context. That's the climate change issues. The warming of the waters is moving fish stocks further north. It's impacting on other species for us. So it's important, if we're losing out the top end, we should be trying to make some gains on the lower end. For us to gain quota where we didn't have a track record, quota was generally assigned based on your track record in terms of catching a fish when quotas were set. We didn't have a track record of having caught bluefin tuna, but they're now in our waters. So we have to, that has to change, and that's why changes need to happen in the common fisheries policy. But I consistently outline the necessity for us to get a share of that. It would have been more challenging while the biomass remained consistent, but as it grows, others will see growth opportunities for them. But I'll be using every opportunity, including discussions with the Commissioner now. It was one of the issues that we raised when the Commissioner was in Castletown Bear back in last March, I think, was it May? For the Maritime Day, where the industry made a very clear, impassioned plea to him how beneficial a small quota of bluefin tuna would matter, because they're a highly sought after species. 1 or 2 bluefin tuna would make a massive difference to the lives and livelihoods of a small group. So you're very much on the ball on that.
Cantrella and Senator Sarah O'Reilly.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, thanks for coming in today. And I'm going to just pick up on what Deputy McLaughlin was talking about in relation to supports for inshore fishermen. You'll have to see and admit that the costs for inshore fishermen are huge. Costs in diesel, costs in bait, our weather, storms, boats tied up. So I do feel that after listening to you there about the quotas, and I've just taken note of some of the things you've said, not feasible, to increase mackerel, not possible. So what is possible? What can you do? And I am a firm believer now that they've been shut out of so many different avenues, that their supports need to be put in place for them. And I think this is something that is within your control. And Europe and other countries may not be so much in your control, but supports for inshore fishermen are definitely within your control and your remit, I feel. And what do you envisage? What kind of supports do you envisage putting together for them? The Fish Assist, there's very low take up on that, and they are considered self-employed. Something like the arts, the basic income for arts or artists, and the basic income for farmers is something that should be looked at. And will you commit to looking at that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Senator. And I note your continued interest in this. And in fairness, you have raised these issues on more than one occasion, and I thank you for that. You're clearly well briefed. So, from a representative of an inland county, you're certainly punching well on this issue. So thanks for that. So what can I do? Well, first of all, the work that I've identified that Kieran Mulvey is underway, I intend to take that and, together with his assistants and others, to work through the issues that arise outside our department. I've set out what this department can do and what it can't do, and I'm doing that fairly. And I'm not washing my hands and say go elsewhere. I intend to pursue whatever comes out of that with the Department of Social Welfare, with the Department of Finance if it's a taxation issue, and other issues. And the lads were talking this morning about the potential for certain VAT issues around petrol as opposed to diesel, etc., because some of the smaller boats are run on petrol rather than diesel. So we look at all of that in a context. But what I also want to do, and I mentioned it, I think, in my opening remarks, I also want to look, even though with reduced quotas, that we try to get greater value for the fishing stock that's brought ashore, and rather than just seeing some of the fishing that's done in a very careful way, really high quality being brought ashore, that it's not just a commodity dropped to a processor that finds its way into the lower level costs. So we've got to work through BIM with the inland fishermen and women to maximise the return on their stock. That's the first thing. And then we've got to look at what financial supports could possibly, if they were to meet the standards required from the state aid rules perspective, that they're not being seen to be a distortion in the marketplace, and other supports then for coastal communities that make their lives easier in terms of reduction of costs. I'm prepared to look at all of that, but I'm not going to commit to a committee that I'm some kind of a fairy godmother at Christmas that I can make all. And I know that's not what you're asking for. You're looking for genuine engagement, and I'm happy to do that.
I'm
happy to engage with you.
looking for genuine engagement, but I'm also trying to tell you, Minister, that there's so many avenues for fishermen, particularly inshore fishermen, that have been closed down to them. And at this stage, I feel that there's, an urgency to supporting them, something like the basic income for artists. That was done and achieved by the Minister for Arts, and I think that needs to be looked at the minute. Another thing I wanted to raise was the regulation, and it's often designed around large industrial vessels, yet inshore and island fishers are expected to comply with the same administrative burden. And I just want to know, what's the department doing to tailor regulation for smaller boats? And I'm not asking for weaker regulation, I'm asking for more, tailored.
Yeah, and I think there's some tailoring there at the minute, because depending on the volume of fish that are landed, they don't have to go into designated ports, some of the smaller ones. And I know the lads have talked about that to me as well, in terms of, could those limits be looked at? I think from my perspective, it's about trying to assist the fishermen in managing their effort with the least burden, whilst at the same time protecting fish stocks and not creating some kind of a lacuna where those that would seek to exploit, and the smaller guys and women generally don't, quite frankly, they don't. They just want to make a living. So any changes I have to make, I have to be cautious and conscious that there isn't or aren't unintended consequence. But again, as I said, the programme of engagement that I have in place through the Kieran Mulvey work is aimed at collecting all those ideas bringing them together and trying to work through them. And I'm hoping to be able to get onto that in the early part of next year.
And
I will engage with the committee.
have you a timeline on that and when that is going to be collated and decided upon?
I haven't a cut-off date because I have to work with the people that are engaged in this. But as soon as I get that report, I will move quickly with it, and I expect I'll be back before the committee, engaged with yourselves on it, and I'm happy to share it with you when we have all of that together. I mean, I do see the urgency, and I know that's inherent in your questioning, that there is an urgency, because I know the costs of doing business for small-scale operators is very challenging.
And the last thing, I was very shocked to hear the last time we had some of the Ireland representatives in here of the lack of, equipment and like even water, electricity in some of the ports. And I think that's low-hanging fruit that you could deal with pretty straight away. That shouldn't nearly have to be brought up.
No, and I agree with you. And we did quite a bit over the last number of years. Some before my time, some under the Bellamy funding, which was the Brexit Adjustment Fund for local authorities. I think there was probably 34 million pumped into that over a short period of time, and that was one-off funding that was available, and it saw in relatively short period of time. There was a lot of work done. And there were limits in terms of when it had to be spent by, because of the way the Brexit Adjustment Fund worked more generally. Last year we spent close to 4.3 million. This year we'll be spending close to 4.3 million. I hope to have the same amount next year, and I'm hopeful that administered 40 million to 13 local authorities under the scheme, 37.8 million from BAR and 2.6 million from the national adjustment. And then there was in 2024 12.25 million to 15 local authority marine infrastructure projects, previously funding under the Bellamy scheme, right? So there's 40, 50, 60, there's nearly 60 million there in the last couple of years. But I'm conscious there's more to be done, and I'm sure the chairman, when he gets back, will remind us of Helvic, where I had an opportunity to go down and have a look at. There's Union Hall in Cork. These are significant projects that go above the threshold that I have available to me, but I'm looking at ways to try to bring together, as I responded to one of the previous questioners, about trying to bring together other departments, whether it be the Department of Sport and Tourism, who have some role in this in terms of pleasure and leisure craft, and then on the tourism side. So, and then on Derek Cleary's department, on that community piece. So if we could put something together collectively, but when that work is done, I'll come back to the committee with a more comprehensive response. So between 2010 and 2024, the department invested about 356 million in publicly owned marine infrastructure through a mix of national exchequer and Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund. Now, I'm only just giving you that by way of background. That's money that's spent. There's still demand.
I'm just going to say that with all that money, there are still piers that are left without water, without electricity, without ice.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't be.
No, I agree. Ice is a different thing, but certainly electricity, the security cameras are needed, because lots of the smaller scale operators have units on the shoreline, and I would encourage those fishermen and women that identify opportunities. When we release the scheme, we did last year in March, we might try to get it away earlier this year if we can, to contact their local authorities. There's usually an engineer set aside. I know Deputy Cooney and I would know in Clare, there's an engineer for the maritime area, and he's particularly good at identifying, even where there isn't people coming to him with ideas, he's looking at opportunities based on his knowledge. And I would hope that other coastal counties would do the same, have an engineer that gets out there, is proactive, identifies the little projects that could work. And what I would also say is, sometimes it looks insurmountable. We have a set limit of about 275,000 or 280,000 with match funding on the schemes. We'll have to just check that number. And the council have to put forward, I think it's 25%. But even within that, I've seen some really good work done where maybe they wanted 500,000 of a project done, but you do it over 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden you have a decent facility. So I would encourage Oireachtas members, and when the scheme opens, I'll communicate with all Oireachtas members, and maybe you can feed it into your local authority. So if you identify, it'd be hard to find one in Cavan, but we never know. Thanks very much. Thanks, Senator.
Deputy Cooney.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, look, thank you, Minister Dooley, for your opening statement. Look, as a Clareman, you'll know that our small boat fishing industry in the county has collapsed, as we're well aware. It is a fraction of what it used to be. This is an industry that could provide very significant onshore added value in communities that need it, particularly through the processing of high-quality, high-value fish and their use in our local restaurants and hotels, even in the West Clare, the Clare area and the Midwest region. Minister, can I ask you how you plan to regenerate the industry in places like Carrigo Hole, Dunbeg, Quilty, Liscannor and other places across the west coast of Clare? The difference it would mean if we could get it back up and running again. There was a lot of people self-employed in it in the past, but unfortunately very small numbers at the moment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy. And I know you have a strong interest. You've been in touch with me on this on a number of occasions. And I've had an opportunity to visit some of the small-scale fishermen in the areas that you talk about. There's a mixture of activity there. There's the sea angling, and there's a number of people generating gainful employment from taking sea anglers out as part of their leisure and pleasure activities, and that supports some accommodation providers in the area. There are other small-scale operators that are mainly in the inshore sector, fishing for lobster and crab. I suppose stocks have dwindled over recent years, and that's why there's not as many involved in it. We had a very significant programme of V-notching of the lobster, which is aimed at ensuring that the female lobster, when they're fished, the fisherman is provided with a significant payment to put a V-notch on the fish and put it back in the water. These are for the female lobsters that have berries on them. So in other words, they have eggs on them. And we're trying to keep them for another 3 or 4 years in the water, so that it will improve and increase the level of lobsters into the future. We have other conservation work going on with crab, the brown crab, and there is a brown crab document that has been provided that we published recently, and I intend to implement the recommendations of that. So what it's aimed at is trying to increase through conservation and maintain, at best, to maintain the existing fleet that's there, and hopefully grow that over time, because you've rightly identified the opportunity that's there for high quality fish that are brought ashore in a low impact way, rather than in this bulk fishing, which often just goes to mass markets, and the kind of small scale fisheries that the inshore fishermen and women are involved in, and then connect those with the local wholesalers which are providing, you know, CS Fish in Dunbeg, great operation, buying from boats all up and down the west coast of Ireland, and that's direct access into their shops, and they supply to restaurants without ever going into the big producers, and it's that kind of work that I want to continue to encourage. It's almost artisan-like. We've the same, if you look at what happens in Clare, say up in, and you'll be familiar with the Burn Smokehouse, where Brigitte Curtin is taking Irish salmon from, you know, ethically, organically farmed Irish salmon, smoking it, bringing it to a very high standard and exporting it into the United States and elsewhere at premium prices. And that's where I see the future of these small-scale fisheries. It's not recognising that the stocks are challenged. How do you get more for less? It's happening in the main beef sector at the minute. You see farmers are reducing their herd numbers, but they're getting a higher price for beef. It's making families more viable. It's making their enterprises more viable and sustainable. And we've got to see the same opportunity in the fishing opportunities. So, and then what we can do, and we did, and you and I and Cathal announced for Clare earlier this year around the funding and just the number, the total quantum of money for Clare, I can't recall, it was maybe 400,000 or whatever, but it puts small amount of money into those little harbours that you talk about, and it makes it easier for fishermen to land their stock and support them in every way that we can. So and Clare is kind of, I suppose, a microcosm of what goes on in coastal communities right around the country.
Would the lack of investment over the years have caused issues that we have now at the moment in the West Clare region, do you think?
It's not so much the lack of funding, Deputy. One's consequence of the other. There's no doubt that the pressure on stocks and the overfishing. I mean, when I go back to the lads in West Clare, they were really pleased that we moved on getting the big boats out of the bays, you know, for fishing for sprat, because not alone were they taking sprat, they were taking everything. The large boats were coming in. So the measure that we took earlier this year to take the larger boats out of the inshore area, those that are over 18 metres, gives all those smaller scale fishermen and women an opportunity now to fish for not just sprat but other species as well that were being absolutely ripped out by these trawlers. Now, they challenged it every way, and I'm not taking the credit for this, quite frankly, because other ministers tried it to the nth degree. So far we've been, I won't say lucky, but we've put in place such a robust legal framework. We believe that it's watertight and will withstand any challenges, but it has taken time to get there. So the activity of some of those large-scale operators over time was really where the damage was done, because it's kind of taken away all the biomass of fish at various different stages of development. Truthfully, it's like anything. If the fish were there, there'd be lots of fellas and women in trying to catch it. So I suppose the conservation, if I was to look to anything, it's a pity that the conservation measures couldn't have been put in place sooner. But successive ministers tried it and they were challenged in the courts. But yes, I think it is a fact that we do need to see continued investment in our piers, because that helps the angling side.
I'd agree, and that's important. But now is it too little, too late? And
it's too little.
Hopefully it is not.
I think both you and I come from a county fair. We would never take a defeatist attitude.
I know.
But I think the conservation is the appropriate measure, and the exclusion of vessels over 18 metres, forcing them out of inshore waters, will help the biomass of fish stocks to recover, and I intend to robustly defend that decision regardless. I have instructed officials in the department that if there's any attempt to undermine this in the courts, we'll challenge it head on. Let's be frank about that. We cannot continue or allow to continue what had happened. So that's a definitive. What I then want to see happen is, as the biomass for the various different species starts to recover, that we support fishermen in their ethical exploitation of those stocks, and that we will support through funding the infrastructure that's necessary and deemed necessary, not just in Clare but along our coastline, as well as then looking at, as I said, the kind of supports that will be necessary to assist fishermen and women remaining in the business while the stocks recover, because we are on a journey now towards conservation for fishing. It has to be done in a more ethical way, and that challenges. But I would also want to give a shout out to the inshore fishermen and women. They've been doing this ethically all their lives. All their lives. It was just unfortunate that some who have a different business model, and they do really good work out into the ocean. But when some sought to come in and clear the inshore area for short-term gain, I think was unfortunate, but that was legal at the time. It's not now, and I intend to robustly defend that legislative position that we've taken.
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks for your interest.
Minister, I have a couple of questions to put myself.
Can I just correct that my record? I did say 280,000 to Senator O'Reilly. It's 250,000 with the local authority, which represents 75% of the funding.
some local
Sorry,
authorities are doing better than others.
That was just it was just to correct the record there. There will be an opportunity to come back in. I just have a couple of questions, Minister, and you were spot on the money when you said that you expected me to raise Kay Helvig, and I do so in the context of previous meetings we've had here in this committee room, where we've met and heard from inshore fishermen, and they have consistently raised the need for investment in ports and harbours. And I just reiterate, and I know we've discussed it several times and at length, the difficulties that local authorities have in accessing that fund for works that are required because of the requirement for shovel-ready applications. And in many respects that puts them at a disadvantage, because some projects that are badly needed in local areas, and the dredging of Kay Helvig is a prime example, but not the only one, the cost of getting a project to shovel-ready stage is sometimes more than the cost of the project itself. And that is just something that I would like you and your officials to take back to the department. I know we have discussed it and you have looked into it already, but I think it is out of kilter with the funding schemes offered by other departments to local authorities for various capital works. In terms of the inshore sector, I think a huge disservice has been done by successive governments over many, many decades when it comes to our inshore sector. A sector and part of our fishing industry that has been sustainable, ethical, locally based, that has ticked all the boxes that now the consumer and those involved in food promotion would like a brand or a product to tick, that it can tell a story, that you have that traceability from lobster pot or from net to plate. And we've had that, and we've allowed it die a death all around our coastline. And Deputy Cooney asked the question, is it too little too late? And it's hard not to be pessimistic, Minister, about the future of the inshore sector. And the survey that Deputy McLaughlin and I undertook last year of sentiment within the fishing industry all around the coast shows that, with stark figures about the how minded people currently fishing are to maybe pass on an enterprise to a son or daughter because they don't see a future in it. The sentiment amongst the industry, and particularly the inshore sector, is on the ground at the moment, and that's before the pelagic crisis and the issues that have come heading our way this autumn. There's a lot I could say in terms of direct payments that small farmers might be able to avail of, but that aren't there for the inshore sector, that aren't there for the fishing industry. The fact that Fish Assist, and I know that doesn't fall under your department, it's the Department of Social Protection, but that Fish Assist is only benefiting 60 families or thereabouts. There isn't the same safety net as maybe a farmer might be expected to achieve. But really, at its crux, this is about access to quota. And I think any inshore fisherman will tell you that it's about access to quota and fair allocation of our national quota. And there is obviously the European negotiations in terms of getting quota for Ireland, Inc., but it's then within Ireland's allocation how it's distributed, and I think that is the biggest one. So there's a couple of questions in there, and I'd like just to hear your thoughts on it and how we can put the inshore sector in the middle of our national maritime strategy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chairman. And you rightly raised the issue in relation to the investment in piers and harbours, and you talked about Kay Helvig, which you had an opportunity to show to me. And I've thought about this, and I am concerned. I don't have the answer just yet, but I'm concerned that there's a gap in our offering in terms of recognising the difficulties for local authorities putting together the kind of ecological reports that are necessary. They're expensive, and in places where that's not available, it's a challenge. But I'm also conscious then, if you don't put some onus on the council, every council is going to take the approach that the state funds it, and that's a complication. We need to look at it. Just, I want to clarify both. So the upper limit for the funding that's provided to local authorities for quays and harbours is 250,000. The department will pay up to 75% of that, so it's 187,500, representing 75% of the total cost. So we're only funding projects that have an overall limit of 250,000. I think I said 287,000 or 275,000 there, so it's 250,000. Council have to come up with 25% of that. and we'll come up with 187,500. Obviously, that will be reviewed, because if you don't review it every year that goes by, with the costs going up, you'll be getting less and less work done, so we'll have to look at that. You talked about Fish Assist. Whilst that doesn't fall under my area, when the report comes back and when we start working with what Kieran Mulvey is working on, I intend to kind of lead on the report rather than say that's for somebody else, and I will engage with others, and I'm sure the committee will be as well. I would hope that on foot of that work that you'll be able to bring in ministers that have a responsibility in other areas, and we'll try to look at that. You've rightly identified, Chairman, the important work that the inshore sector has done. It's sustainable, it's ethical, it's sometimes it's hand to mouth, quite frankly, and that's where I think the financial supports. I think the sector would much prefer to be dealing with fish and the processing of it and the sale of it and the catching of it than looking for support. They're not about handouts, and I get that. But I think it behoves all of us to try to assist through whatever mechanism to keep the sector alive through this conservation phase that we're going through, and hope that can recover. You talked about that connection piece between the catchers, the fishermen and women, and the plate, the table, getting it from the pot to the table. That's really important, and I know we've talked at BIM level about trying to support that, where they play a role in supporting the sector through a tailored training, and was made available to the sector under the Brexit Inshore Business Model Adjustment Scheme. But I think we can do more to assist in that marketing piece. And I'm always conscious when you say you're putting more emphasis or more pressure on people who know what they're doing, and saying, well, you got to do more. But I think through BIM we can do more in helping to identify that connection piece between the distributor to the restaurant and to the table. And I know there's some doing it. I know in Clare, if you head up to North Clare around the Flaggy Shore, you'll see somebody who's selling there locally from the boat at certain times on the pier, and at certain parts of the year you'll see a very significant queue of people who are aware that they can buy fresh lobster like that. So there's work to be done, and we did give supports as well to allow fishermen, I think it was probably under the Brexit as well, where we provide them supports to develop their own tanks to retain the lobsters in water on their own in their own areas, to be able to retain their stock for longer rather than just getting rid of it when it came off the boat. So we've done some of that work in the past, and of course we'd look to continue to do that. On the access to quota, particularly mackerel, with the very significant cut that's envisaged, I don't see any possibility. I'd be misleading if I thought there was any way to give additional quota. The 400 tonnes that are allocated from the overall Irish quota will remain. That's not pro rata cut by 70% or by any percent. That's hardwired, and that will remain next year unless we go below 400. But that's not envisaged at all from the scientific advice. As I said earlier, it was my intention, if we had an increase in mackerel stocks coming from a deal with Iceland, that I was minded to ensure that the inshore would get an additional piece of that. That's not now going to come to fruition because of what has happened. Also, there's 2.5% of 13% mackerel allocated to the polyvalent vessels, and that goes to the under 18 metres vessels. That bit is subject to a cut, all right. The 2.5% of the 13% of the mackerel allocated to the polyvalent vessels. But there is improved representation then on QMAC now with NIF, NIFA and IMRO, and they're on there since 2023 and 2021 respectively. And they are active, and they have improved standing, and the supports that I sought and got agreement from Depender on in relation to the representations of the POs should be helpful to them in making their case in that regard. So that's the issue with the access to the quota that we talked about.
Thank you, Minister. And just very briefly, before I move on to the next speaker, you mentioned BIM, and we've had BIM before this committee, and I note that Ms. Caroline Brockwell has moved on from the position as Chief Executive Officer, and there is a vacancy. My very strong opinion is that insofar as it comes to appointments, and I imagine that there's a process there with the public appointments, but that it would be preferable and certainly worth putting into the mix that the person who will take the position as Chief Executive of BIM should be somebody with industry experience. So completely understand that managing a large organisation tasked with food promotion and industry development needs a particular skill set. But if that skill set could be matched with somebody who has industry experience, that would be something that you would bear in mind in making that appointment. And you may be aware, Minister, we had the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority before this committee last week, and I think I can speak for the whole committee in saying that we were less than impressed with the level of, with how questions were answered. What reporting mechanism does SFPA have to you as Minister? Because we were told by the director that ultimately is responsible to this committee, but we found it very difficult to get straight answers to our questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So to go back to your point there on the SFPA. Well, no, sorry. First of all, you talked about the CEO of BIM. Before we can advertise that, it has to go through the Department of Public Expenditure, which it did request, and we have been given sanction to go and appoint. That'll be a decision. The decision in relation to the appointment of the CEO doesn't fall to me. I don't have a role in it. It's the board that ultimately makes that decision. But the very fact that you're raising an issue of concern here, I'm sure will be. I'll ensure that it's communicated to the board that it was something that was raised at the committee, and I don't disagree with you. I suppose in the first instance, the board has to be confident that the CEO of any organisation understands corporate governance, has a clear understanding about ensuring that the legislative basis upon which the agency is established is adhered to, and all of that, and then has the opportunity to come to us and to your committee.
Minister, just to, so I mean, it's a suggestion rather than a
concern.
Sure. I don't mean in any way to be misunderstood in terms of casting aspersions on
not
any
at all.
previous CEO. It's just a suggestion rather than a point of concern, just to be very clear.
That's how I'm taking it, and that's why I'm saying it's good to amplify those thoughts here, and certainly something that can be passed on. And I think the broader based person that has, the more attributes and better understanding of what is required, I also think is important, is people that have flair for ideas. It's about marketing as well. It's about consuming more fish domestically. There's an element of creativity there, but I take your point. On the SFPA, they're answerable to this committee. I have no role in terms of how they do their business. In fact, I'm precluded in terms of legislation. But I am anxious, though, that the SFPA would come before the committee, discuss their constraints, discuss their mandate, discuss how they do their business, discuss how they evaluate risk, how they see their role, how they see it as part of the overall fishing effort and the overall fishing industry, and ensuring that whilst they have a really important role in enforcing regulation, both domestic and international, and need to be seen to do that, that at the same time it's seen as fair, that it's robust, and that it's proportionate to the risk that exists. And I would hope that they would come and have an open, frank, but general conversation with you about those. I fully understand, not that it would matter anyway what my thoughts might be, but I do understand and respect the separation that's there and how they can't get into the detailed discussion about a particular case. But I think over time, and I mentioned to a previous questioner, we've always found ways to take what might be our concerns about a specific into a general discussion that doesn't involve, keeps that separation. And I think that's really important. So the department does undertake corporate governance oversight. So we have corporate governance in relation to ensuring that the administration of the way is in accordance with the return standards for state agencies, so that the body is in accordance with the adhere standards. So we look at it from an overall corporate governance perspective. I think your concerns are more about the day-to-day activities, and that's something that you should be able to question.
Okay.
In general terms.
Minister, and I don't expect you to respond to this because correspondence will issue in due course, but there is a suggestion that we would invite both yourself as Minister and indeed the SFPA jointly before a committee, and that was a suggestion from this committee, but also from the SFPA. But we'll issue correspondence in due course.
That's fine. And just to confirm, I would have no issues in being in attendance for such a committee.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Gallagher.
Thank the Minister, officials, and to thank him for his presentation. First of all, let me say that I'm pleased that you have eventually got approval from DEPAR relating to the 2 Inshore POs, and that's important that they get that recognition, and funding is also included there. I think I asked this before, but I want to repeat it, and I want to know where the department stand on relation to the inshore fishing for bass, for salmon, for sea trout, and for razorfish. And razorfish in particular in the northwest, they're there in abundance, but unfortunately, and there's a very lucrative market, but I think we must decide sooner rather than later how quickly we can open this. As for the salmon, closed now for many, many years, and we were told at that time that if it was closed because of possible overfishing, and of course the pressure came from Iceland, who were going to provide millions by way of compensation to the salmon. Not a penny came, but we were foolish enough, and the government were foolish enough to accept their offer that counted for nothing. So that's bass, salmon, sea trout, and razorfish. The next issue I want to refer to is the small fishermen, or in fact all fishermen now, are only employed a few days a week or a few weeks in the year, but the small fishermen, they're self-employed, and even though the Oireachtas looked at a recommendation to provide job seekers, illness benefit and other special welfare benefits for these fishers, it came to nothing, and we're told that the fish assist is not taken up by many. But I think included in that should be job seekers allowance, because job seekers benefit, as we know, is depending on your contributions, and if you have very few contributions, you're not going to be able to avail of that. The Island Fisheries Heritage Bill 2017, and I know you've outlined to us that your hands are very much tied when it comes to the advice that it's not compatible with Irish and EU legislation, but at least you're prepared to look at that. But I would put a time limit on it and hope we can have a look at it and see if there's some way around this. Speaking of the social welfare, I think it's also important that when you will be speaking to your colleague, Deputy Derek O'Leary, about the small harbours which are under the jurisdiction of the local authorities, the only ones under your remit are the sea fishery harbours, but there are many, many small ones, and we discussed this at previous meetings. You will recall, in relation to the SFPA and Section 68, Section 68 is one that protects the Chief Executive of the SFPA. You can't answer any questions, anything to do with cases that were in the court or are in the court, but by a strange that they can issue press releases about cases that were successful in the court, but cases that are not successful, they decide to shy away from this. So I think, Minister, you will have to look very closely at Section 68 and remove that barrier. If it's a barrier that's there, remove it, so we, to whom the Sea Fisheries Authority report, but there's not much point in coming here and reporting to us when they can't report on all issues. But we will find out fairly soon, and I know it's been said, oh, well, it's the Director of Public Prosecutions, that they pay the bill, but they only go on the evidence that they get from the Sea Fisheries Protection, and evidence that went on for 10 full years. And of course, it was unfair to the company. It changed the whole issue of weighing fish in the factories as opposed to weighing them in ambient temperature on the piers. So you will recall, Minister, on the first time you visited Donegal, you very kindly and at short notice met with a representative from Burton Port to land into Burton Port. But the issue is still the same. They cannot land on a Saturday, and they're missing markets in the UK largely. And can I say that we don't mind if it's a common rule for all of the country, but in Donegal, it's one rule for Inshore, it's another rule for West Donegal, and I'm making a charge today that that's totally unfair and it's discriminatory. And I'm asking you, Minister, to have a look at this. Landings into Burton Port, there should be open from 10 to 5 on a Saturday because it's open elsewhere. You can't have force majeure every Saturday because it doesn't arise. But if you have to go to Killybegs or you have to go into North Donegal, it's not on. And there are plenty, and let me tell you, there are plenty of sea fishery advisors there, and they can be there other days of the week. But I'm imploring upon you to look at this. I don't expect an answer now, but to have another look at it and try and ensure that there's no discrimination when it comes to Burton Port. So maybe I'll be another opportunity if necessary. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deputy, and thank you for your, not alone your ongoing participation in this committee, but your advice to all of us who are around this sector, your knowledge and experience both in Donegal, nationally and internationally, is hugely helpful to the sector generally. So just to thank you for that. You raised the issues about bass, salmon, razor, clam, etc. Just on relation to bass, I think, as you know, there's been a prohibition on commercial fishing of bass since the 1990s. In addition to that, the EU vessels are prohibited from fishing for sea bass in Irish waters, particularly Area 7, which includes the Irish Sea, the Celtic Sea and waters southwest of the west coast. And there is some recreational fishing, and they're all strictly controlled, with only a catch and release recreational fisheries allowed in February and March, and a bag limit of 2 per fisher per day in January, and from the 1st of April to the 31st of December. I understand that Irish waters, in Irish waters, sea bass stock is at a maximum northerly range, and that the stock is considerably smaller than it would be in more southern waters. It is also a slow-growing species, making it particularly vulnerable to overfishing. Consequently, there are no plans, as I understand it, to reintroduce commercial fishing of the sea bass in waters around Ireland at present. However, I will seek an update from the Marine Institute in terms of understanding where the biomass of sea bass and other species are, and we'll revert to you with that information to see if there's any, because we are, as you know, engaged with the Marine Institute in a consistent analysis of the biomass of various different species. So if anything is likely to change in that regard based on what the scientific evidence is showing, I'll happily share it, but I don't want to commit to suggesting that something can be opened if the scientific advice doesn't support it. You raised a thing then on the salmon fishery. Salmon returns to Irish waters, you know, has just decreased very significantly in recent decades. It's considered that if Ireland had not adopted its management measures, including ending the indiscriminate mixed stock fishing at sea since 2007, the decline would be considerably more. Ireland manages its salmon population on a river-by-river basis based on robust conservation-focused scientific advice, and our salmon management plan regime follows international best practice advised by the North Atlantic Salmon Conservation Organisation and the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. Any deviation from current policy would be contrary to the international independent scientific advice and could potentially lead to a conflict with EU and international obligations on grounds of not protecting vulnerable Irish and international salmon stocks. So the conservation imperative demands that current salmon stocks are not further eroded by mismanagement or inappropriate exploitation, whether via angling, commercial fisheries in rivers, or through the operation of mixed stock fisheries at sea or in estuaries. And I know from the work that I'm coming across in the other department, which I have a role on the inland fisheries side, certainly the stock in the river of salmon coming back is not improving. So I don't think scientific advice will change there. On the razor clam, I understand that the Marine Institute recently provided scientific advice for the razor clam fishery in the North Irish Sea in respect of the current fishing year 25 to 26. Our officials are consulting with the Marine Institute and other marine agencies regarding that advice, and I'll bring it to the attention of the committee when I have further information there. And you're right in identifying that I did meet with people from Burtonport, and I was taken by what they were requesting. I'll be honest with you, it seemed fair to me, and I will have it looked at again. I think what you had said to me at the time, and the people that I met, was that they didn't want it all the time, but they needed it at certain times of the year when the catch was coming ashore. And it's about flexibility in the allocation of personnel. And I think we're going to have to look at that, and that's something that I can engage with the SFPA on. I'm looking at other requests in relation to how we might manage Howth at the minute because of the inaccessibility of access to Howth at the minute, and the impact that that's having on certain fishing activity, a certain landing activity, because of the dredging that's required there. We're waiting for the EPA licence to come through on that, and we visited with Howth Harbour on that, but I've had recent representation that I feel warrants designation elsewhere to facilitate that, albeit temporary. And I'm certainly, I want to do it, and we just need to find a way to do it quickly. And I think the same could apply in Burtonport. I don't want to make a commitment on it, but it's something that I want to address, and we will try to get back to you relatively quickly on that, Deputy.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you both. It's
the one that I can be more positive on anyway.
Deputy Whitmore, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just want to go back to the issue of bluefin tuna, Minister, and you were very clear in earlier discussions the importance or the potential importance of this to Inshore, and really we should be fighting hard to ensure that we are having access to some of that quota. I've had a look through previous discussions in the Oireachtas on this. I mean, this has been an issue, I think, since 2015 or even earlier. And I have to say the responses from the ministers in 2015 and 16 and 17 are very similar to the responses we're getting now. So it seems it hasn't really progressed hugely. You did mention the meeting that was held in Seville. So I assume it was at the International Commission on Conservation of Atlantic Tuna, so the ICAT meeting. So that was the latest meeting. And it would appear from that meeting that they would expect bluefin tuna quotas to increase by close to 20%. I'm just interested because I've just been doing some searching here, and Malta, one of the ministers from Malta has been in the media following that meeting saying that Malta is poised for major increases in national tuna quota. So she anticipates that from the meeting it was indicated that their quota could rise by as much as 70 tonnes, which is a historic increase that will bring their country's total allocation to over 500 tonnes. So it appeared that that meeting was quite a critical meeting because quotas for individual states were discussed. Can you let me know, can you tell us what came out of that meeting for Ireland? And can you also let us know, I assume we were represented at that meeting. How many people were representing Ireland at that meeting? Because I think Malta had 13 people at that meeting, 4 from different departments.
Yeah, I'll have to come back to you on the number that represented us there. I certainly got a text or an email late on Saturday explaining that there had been, that the European share had reduced of the TAC by a very small point, because we had been arguing at the recent council meeting that the European share should remain the same. I was informed that it had been reduced ever so slightly, but it was a reduction in the percentage terms, but there was an overall increase in the tonnage in the total allowable catch. So I assume it's on the basis of that Malta have recognised that if the allowable catch goes up, they will have a percentage increase. That, unfortunately, I wouldn't be in a position to make that assertion for the simple reason that we don't have or didn't have a track record and therefore don't have a quota currently. I'm arguing for that at every available opportunity. I've met with the Commissioner on a number of occasions and I've outlined that position in a very sort of direct way to other member states. I think the work that we have done heretofore in the work that I talked about in 2019 in terms of that experimental work, scientific work in that catch and release was an exercise in demonstrating that the fish were in our waters and that we had a justification in seeking quota. It's not easy, to be honest with you, because for Ireland to get some quota, somebody else will have to see their potential increase drop. I'm trying to build alliances with member states, showing goodwill whenever I can on other issues, in the hope that we'll reach a point that we will get when that allocation comes out. To the best of my knowledge, the decision that was taken at the weekend was about the split between what Europe will have and what other third countries will have. It's my understanding that the allocation of what member states will get has yet to be determined, but I will have to come back to you on that. I just don't have the clarity to hand.
That would be very useful. I suppose I have looked at the participants list now. Look, there's caveats around it. I don't know if, you know, when you're looking at these documents, sometimes there can be, but it would appear that we sent one person over. Other countries sent very senior people and multiple senior people from different departments. I'm just wondering, in the instance of such an important meeting and coming to a crunch time, because my understanding is that this will be decided in December, is that correct? So like we really are coming to a crunch time. I'm just wondering, I mean, we really should have been in and had a large contingent of senior people in fighting for this for us. And I'm just wondering why that decision wasn't made. I mean, not saying anything about the person who went over, but, you know, just in relation to just having a team of people over there who are really presenting our case. I mean, surely that meeting would have been a very, very important one to do that.
Yeah, I'll check that out, Deputy, but my understanding was that the exercise at that ICAT meeting was about the allocation that Europe would get. So the Commission ultimately were effectively negotiating that position with the Presidency. The battle lines in terms of quota allocation will be over the next 2 weeks in background discussions. And at political level, I'm having those discussions with Member States at the moment. And our officials at European level are having those conversations with their counterparts. It comes down to the crunch in December, as you know, where the Council will go on for a number of days. Whether or not an enhanced team would have in any way strengthened our hand for what's ahead, I can't give you clarity on it, but I'm confident with the team that we have in Brussels that we're fighting to the best of our ability, and we're putting forward the needs and expectations of our fishermen and women in that regard. But I'm happy to come back to you with more detail as to what representation we had there when I established it.
Deputy McLaughlin.
So thank you, Minister, for this engagement today, and we look forward to seeing progress on the various issues. So in terms of the issue, we spoke about the concerns of the inshore and islands fishermen in Ireland and how we interpret Article 17 of the Common Fisheries Policy and how we allocate the publicly owned quota that we have. So there's a Board Beer report, as I understand, in terms of hook and line mackerel. Is that on your desk? If so, when would that be published? Which would demonstrate the potential that's there. So just to get a response on that. And then I just want to revisit this issue of, just as a minister, and you'd indicated earlier about that, and we understand we have a profound, unprecedented crisis in terms of mackerel. due to the recklessness of of a number of countries, Norway, Iceland, Faroe Islands, Russia. People talk about the British involvement in that. So that's well documented. You'll be dealing with that in December, but that does have an impact on what you have available and what you were going to allocate. But there is a reality that this is a publicly owned quota. It belongs to the Irish people, and we have a very large sector of inshore and islands that's, in terms of their representation on these committees, you have the Northwest Herring Committee where there's been a dispute, and I just, you decide the membership of these committees, as I understand, Minister. So you obviously listen to the concerns of the inshore and islands. There needs to be an intervention, and there needs to be a fairness in terms of the allocation. And whenever I've listened to the inshore and islands communities, they're reasonable about this, and they understand. But 400 tonnes of, what was an overall quota of mackerel previously was a very, very small percentage. Like, it was really small. And if you allocate 400 tonnes across the entire inshore sector, and then the whole issue of herring. So I just want to get a sense of your interpretation of Article 17 of the Common Fisheries Policy. That's what the inshore and islands groups would flag with us. They don't believe that we're adhering to the spirit or the intent of Article 17. And just to get a sense of your views on this, how you intend to deal with this, and to resolve the membership of these committees, and in a way that does take on board track record and what people have built up, but also is much more fair than what's there right now. So I want to get a sense of that.
Yeah, so thanks very much. And you raised the issue in relation to the allocation, and what I talked about earlier was what I had hoped we'd be able to do if there was an increased mackerel, which would have assisted the inshore fishery in particular, and I think would have given them a better chance to stay ahead in terms of the costs and what they're facing. Unfortunately, that didn't transpire, and then the whole thing has been undermined now because of the scientific advice. So I don't see in any circumstance being able to increase that 400 tonne, but it is protected. It's the best we can do in the current climate. You talked there about the issue of that BIM report, and that goes back to a belief that there's been a relatively low uptake on the hook and line fishery for mackerel, for the line caught mackerel, and this should be a premium product, we believe, that would return a fairly good return. But unfortunately, the hook and line caught mackerel seems to be going into the pelagic bulk market, which obviously has a lower value. So it was on foot of that back in 2022-23 that BIM commissioned a report on market opportunities, and that's the report I think that you referred to. And it was like, initial report didn't address all the issues involved, and the department requested that BIM engage with Board BIA to ensure a comprehensive report was prepared. That has been some of the delay, bearing in mind that the rationale behind the fishery is to provide a high premium product. So fish that are caught, as you know more, mind me lecturing you about fishing, but so caught on the hook and line fish that haven't been as processed in advance of, or as trafficked as much through the various systems, that should be commanding a higher premium. So that's what we're trying to get to. So that revised draft report from BIM has been received by the department and is currently being reviewed. So I'll come back to you in terms of when we hope to be able to produce that. But that was very much aimed at trying to maximise the return on that 400 tonnes that would be caught with hook and line, a premium product that, again, like we talked about earlier, that you might be able to move it into local markets, get better return rather than taking a lower price. Now, look, with where we see mackerel trending at the moment, because of the recognition that next year there'll be a lot more scarce, the price has increased significantly. So for For those that are in the pelagic side, they've seen a massive cut in their quota of 70% for the inshore fishermen, with an increase of, with retaining their 400 tonnes. You could potentially see a doubling of the price, even in the sort of the pelagic bulk route, if that's the route they went. It could command a higher price if we could assist them with finding more direct access to local markets into the sort of restaurant or artisan space. So that's what we're trying to do with that report.
Just, and in fairness, you mightn't have all the facts available, but I just ask you to pay attention to that Northwest Herring Committee issue. If you don't have a response, if you could just maybe come back.
Because, yeah, I was reading through it last night. So the Northwest policy change in 2022-23, where quota falls below 7,000 tonnes, 350 tonnes are set aside for the non-ring fence vessels under 20 metres. And then there's adjustments and swaps and deductions are not taken into consideration. On the Celtic Sea, the open fishery in Dunmore box for vessels under 17 metres opened on the 16th of November. And we'd be asking the sector to re-engage with the Northwest Herring Committee. That was something that I was anxious to try and get that management committee back, because it did kind of, and I met with some of the lads involved, and it just wasn't kind of going direction. So look, I'll come back to you in terms of how we might be able to. It just needs a bit of intervention from yourself. It does, yeah.
That's all I would say.
Yeah, yeah. No, we'll try and get them back around the table again.
Thank you very much. Deputy Cal.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, large piers and harbours come under the remit of your department. Smaller piers then are supposed to come under the remit of local authorities, and I know for a fact that the vast majority of local authorities have no budget for piers at all. They're relying totally on the department. I know that from my many years as a member of Kerry County Council, and from talking to other councillors across the country over many years now. I believe there is a need, for a specific budget for local authorities for the small piers. Some of them or many of them, to be fair, are falling into a very poor state of repair and are dangerous in cases and need remedial works and improvement works to be carried out. In regards to a particular pier, I've raised it before. Kilkeveragh Pier in Portmagee. It's a very old pier. It was actually built by Trinity College, funny enough, and was under their remit up until the early 1900s. And it's in no man's land now, and it's still used by the local community there. It's important. I'd ask if that could be investigated and if some funding could be found from some source to help out there, to help the local community. They carry out a bit of fishing and a bit of marine activity and sport and leisure, etc. I'd appreciate that. I have to mention Cremon Pier. The campaign there is going on well over 100 years. There's no landing facility at all there. If something could be initiated there, a pilot scheme or something to get that project moving, it was promised many times over many years. A project that you're very familiar, Minister. You came down to Renard Pier to look at the slip there. It's important for the use of the ferry. The existing ferry is coming to the end of its lifetime, and they have a larger ferry gap, but they need to widen the slipway there by 3 metres. And the way things are going, it won't be ready for the 2026 tourist season. That'd be devastating for the village island and the local economy, the Skellig Ring, and indeed the Ivra Peninsula, and it's with Mara. And I would ask that you try and get movement on that to see can we have it ready for the 2026 season. You might also, when you're in discussions with Mara, just inquire about the position in regards to the slip at Portmagee. They're looking for an extension there, and maybe you might inquire about the marina. They have a project there as well. You were discussing mackerel there. I watched your contribution there in the European Parliament there recently. and I just want to acknowledge your work in that area. It's very, very difficult. The proposed cut of 70% in 2026, following on from, was it 26% in 2024 due to Brexit, and that was followed in 2025 by a 22% cut. But just keep up the good work there. We need our MEPs and everyone and our government to fight that one. In regards to just a couple of other items, the National Inshore Fisheries Association, they've sought a seat on the Sea Fisheries Protection Authorities on numerous times. I believe that, you know, one would have thought, to be honest, that they would have had a seat on that before now. Could somebody, you know, let me know where that is at? I believe, you know, they should have a member. And the last point I want to raise, I'm jumping back to Cremon again. I live near Cremon, so it is important to me. And Cremon is one of the oldest fishing villages in the whole country, and the licences, the salmon licences, were bought by the department a number of years ago. 11 of the locals retained their licences, and they've been actively fishing. This was only brought to my attention in the past 2 days, and they've been told that as of from now on, it's all over. And I think that's wrong. It's one of the oldest traditions in this country. It's not that they're, you know, in a commercial sense at all. And I would ask that that would be looked at and that decision may be reversed. And I'm conscious of the importance of, you know, rod fishermen and all of that, and I understand the arguments and the scientifics and etc.
Deputy Cal, just I'm conscious of the time. We have to leave the Minister respond.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy, and appreciate your concerns that you raised. Just in relation to smaller piers and the budget, so we had a grant scheme over the years. I'm hoping that it'll have some funding in it this year. And generally, the way that operated was that we looked at projects that were shovel ready up to a maximum cost of 250,000. The department would, if it was minded to, cover up to 75% of the cost, and the council putting in 25%. That's up to a maximum of 187,000 contribution from our department. We put out about 4.3 million on that last year. I'm hopeful that I'll have something close to that next year, and I would encourage county councils to apply for that. The issue that arises is that some of these need significant ecological analysis and reports to go with it to get planning, and then have to go through MARA for various different permissions and licenses, and that can be costly, and the scheme that we currently administer does not provide funding for that, so that's an impediment. Over time, I'd like, if I had had more monies available to me, to be able to assist in relation to that, and the chairman has shown me a project in his area that very much falls into that, but I don't have any further news on that aspect of it for you. I am conscious, though, that around our coastline there are many piers who need far more than 250,000 to bring them to a safe level, and I think it would be a real pity if we let some of these to fall into the sea at a time where we're not short of money. But that's work that I have to do over the coming years to try to get that. So that's where it's at. On the Portmagee side, you're always going to run into an issue where somebody doesn't have ownership, and you did identify that Trinity College built it. Now, I don't know whether Trinity College still claim ownership of it or have ownership of it. It might be worth looking at the legal services within Kerry County Council, and maybe there's an opportunity through adverse possession or through some kind of a CPO to take ownership of it. If it fell into the ownership of the council, well then perhaps if there was a scheme at a later stage, or even if the small scheme that I talked about, that might resolve your issue. I offer that by way of general, not any specific commitment, but I just have a look at that, because officials here would suggest to me that there's a question mark over the ownership, and that will always be an impediment. So have a look at that. You've raised the issue of Cremon with me on a number of occasions. I don't know if the small scheme would be of benefit there, or we need to look at something else, but I'll engage with you on that. Renard's a real issue, and that's something that I, as you know, want to progress. I've been in touch with MARA to have them expedited. MARA is a new agency established to address the foreshore licensing issues that used to be part of the foreshore office previously. new agencies take time to get up to speed. It does fall under my responsibility, and I've been in regular touch with the agency. In the last month alone, I think they made 10 or 11 decisions, which is a record for them, and I'm hoping that by the end of the year they will have moved on about 30. They have been concentrating on the larger offshore renewable requests that are there, which is obviously important from the state's perspective, but I have asked them to look at some of the smaller ones that might never get priority but are really important in a local area. The one in Renard being a particular point, it's a tourist attraction out onto Valencia. There's a wonderful little facility there, and I know that the craft, the ferry that's operational there at the minute is reaching the end of its operational life, and it does need a widening of the base. Now, the work to be done there is small, and I think we're going to have to find too, and I need to work through this, where small scale works like that are being treated in terms of the kind of environmental analysis and reports have to go through, I think is not proportionate to the risk of the small scale works. So I think we need to look at that again, but I will continue to encourage Mara to address that issue.
Thanks, Minister.
30 seconds.
Deputy Galler has asked to come in, so I'm minded to give 30 seconds to Deputy Galler just to come in, if that's okay.
Just want to ask the Minister. The Minister's referred. The Minister's referred to the engagement that you and your officials are having in Brussels about the forthcoming negotiations. Minister, I have asked the Minister for Foreign Affairs. I got a negative answer because it wasn't his remit. I've asked the Minister yourself. Are you engaging with the non-coastal European states? Because while fishers have no interest, they have an input into the decision making, and rather than to go along with the recommendation of the Commission, I think they should. We have friends in all those countries, so are they being contacted now? Just don't leave it until the day of the cuts.
Well, thanks very much, Deputy, and that's something you shared with me in the past, in the early stages of me being appointed to this position. And yes, we have a programme of engagement over the last while, and it continues right up, and we are engaging with the non-coastal states as well and trying to build alliances. As you know, though, from experience, many of those will be influenced by some of the larger states that they have an interest in and where the presidency is at. So we have a programme to try to exert the influence that we have, limited and all as it might be, but we have good standing at European level, and we now need to mobilise that, and we do need to energise our efforts, and we're doing that over the past while and on ahead.
Gramila Margaret Ara, agus Ms Brennan and Ms Forrest, Asocht Fen are down to Gramagov Khumala Lenar Muil. Thank you to our members here who've engage in this debate, and indeed to our witnesses, to the Minister and to Ms Brennan and Ms Forrest for your participation here today. As there are no further matters for discussion, today's meeting stands adjourned until the 2nd of December 2025.